The drop pod hit the surface of Salhin 4 like a thrown stone. It cracked open against gray rock and dry dust, and the body inside rolled out onto the ground. She lay there for a long time, face down, breathing in dirt and ash. Her name was Kalith Sorvan. She was Vathari, tall, thin, with skin the color of storm clouds and faint blue markings that ran along her spine and up to her temples. Those markings used to glow. They were dim now, almost dead, like the rest of her. She pushed herself up onto her hands and knees. The sky above was brown and empty. There were no birds, no clouds, no ships, just a flat, ugly sky pressing down on a flat, ugly world. Salhin 4 was a dead moon on the edge of Vathari space. The Dominion used it for one purpose, to throw away the people it no longer wanted. Kalith was one of those people now. She checked the pod. Inside she found a thin survival suit, already torn at one shoulder, and a single ration cube meant to last 7 days. That was all. No weapon, no communication device, no message, not even a sentence telling her why she was here. But she knew why. 3 weeks ago she had been a junior strategist aboard the Vathari warship Pale Silence. She was young for her rank, sharp-minded and obedient, everything the Dominion wanted its officers to be. She followed orders. She studied the enemy. She never asked questions that didn't have approved answers. Then the order came down from the Arch-Synod, the ruling council of the Dominion. A colony on the border world of Teshen had been declared impure. It was a mixed settlement, Vathari living alongside Rithki traders and a handful of other species. The Arch-Synod wanted it gone, not conquered, not relocated, destroyed. Every building, every person, every child. Kalith read the order 3 times. She looked at the colony data. Teshen was a farming world. The people there grew food. They traded grain. They had schools. She didn't refuse the order. She wasn't brave enough for that. But she did something almost as dangerous. She filed a formal objection. A single document sent through proper channels asking if the council had considered alternatives. That was all. One piece of paper. One question. It was enough. Within hours, 2 Dominion enforcers came to her quarters. They didn't speak. They put a black hood over her head and took her away. She never saw her room again. She never saw her family again. She never heard her own name spoken by another Vathari voice again. The Dominion didn't execute its dissenters. That would make them into something, a memory, a warning, a story. Instead, the Dominion did something far worse. It erased them. Kalith's name was removed from every record, every file, every database in Vathari space. Her family was reassigned, a word that meant they were split apart and sent to different worlds, forbidden from speaking of her. To the Dominion, Kalith Sorvan had never existed. She was a ghost made of flesh, thrown onto a rock to rot. Now she stood on that rock, holding a ration cube and wearing a torn suit, and she was completely alone. The first 2 days were simple survival. She found a ridge of broken rock that blocked the wind and made a shelter between 2 fallen slabs. She ate small pieces of the ration cube, making it last. She drank from a thin stream of chemical-tainted water that tasted like metal and made her stomach hurt. On the 3rd day, she found wreckage, the remains of old drop pods and abandoned equipment from others who had been thrown here before her. Most of it was useless, but Kalith was a strategist. She knew how to find value in broken things. She pulled apart a shattered communication relay and laid the pieces on the ground. The power cell was dead, but the signal board still worked. If she could find a power source, she could send something. Not a real distress call, the Dominion had made sure no Vathari frequency would ever carry her voice again. But maybe she could create a pattern, an anomaly, something strange enough that a passing ship might notice. On the 4th day, the creatures came. They were low to the ground, fast, with hard shells and too many legs. Salhin 4 was supposed to be barren, but life had found a way into its cracks and caves. The creatures hunted in packs of 4 or 5. They weren't large, but their jaws were strong and they were hungry. Caliph fought them with a metal bar pulled from the wreckage. She killed 2 and drove the others back, but not before one of them sank its teeth into her left leg. The wound was deep and ugly. Blood, dark purple, the color of Vathari blood, ran down her shin and pooled in the dust. She dragged herself back to her shelter and wrapped the wound with strips torn from her suit. Her hands were shaking. The blue markings on her skin flickered once weakly and went dark again. On the 5th day, she got the signal board working. She wired it to a half-charged power cell from an old pod and set it to pulse in an irregular pattern, not a message, just noise, but noise with a shape, a heartbeat in the static. She aimed it at the sky and hoped. On the 6th day, her ration cube ran out. Her leg was swollen and hot. Infection was setting in. She lay in her shelter and stared at the brown sky and thought about Teshin, the colony she had tried to save with one piece of paper. She wondered if it still existed. She wondered if her question had changed anything at all. She didn't think it had. On the 7th night, Caliph was dying. She knew it the way a soldier knows, not with panic but with a quiet, tired certainty. Her body was shutting down. The infection had spread. She was too weak to stand, too tired to care. She closed her eyes and waited for the dark to take her. Then she heard something. A sound, low and deep, growing louder, the unmistakable roar of an engine breaking through atmosphere. She opened her eyes and saw light cutting through the brown sky. A ship was coming down. It punched through the dust clouds and descended toward the surface with the grace of a falling hammer. It was not a Vathari ship. Vathari ships were smooth, elegant, built like blades. This thing was the opposite. It was blocky and rough, covered in thick armor plates and scorch marks. It looked like someone had built a fortress and taught it to fly. The design was crude, almost ugly, and completely unfamiliar. Caliph watched it land 200 meters from her shelter. Dust and gravel flew in every direction. The engine screamed and then went quiet. A ramp lowered from the belly of the ship and a figure walked out. It was smaller than a Vathari, broader. It walked upright on 2 legs and wore a battered suit of gray armor. Its face was bare, flat, with soft skin, no markings, no ridges. 2 eyes, 1 mouth. Simple, almost plain. A human. Caliph had heard of them. Every species in this part of the galaxy had heard of humans. They were young, barely a few centuries into space travel. They were loud, stubborn, sentimental, and they bred like insects. The Dominion considered them minor annoyances at best, dangerous pests at worst. No Vathari strategist took them seriously. The human looked around the barren landscape. Then it looked at her. Caliph tried to speak, but her voice was gone. She tried to raise her hand, but her arm wouldn't move. She could only lie there, broken and bleeding, staring at this strange, small creature standing in the dust of her grave. The human walked toward her, not fast, not slow, steady, certain. It knelt beside her and she saw its face clearly for the first time. It was a male. His skin was tanned and scarred. His eyes were brown and calm. He studied her wounds, her torn suit, the dried blood on the ground. Then he reached for a med kit on his belt, and without a word he started to help her. Caliph wanted to ask why. She wanted to understand what this creature wanted, what price it would demand, what deal it was calculating. No one helped for free. That was the first lesson the Dominion taught its children. But the human didn't explain. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask what she was worth. He just worked. Steady hands, calm eyes, moving with the quiet focus of someone who had done this before. And for the first time in 7 days, Caliph felt something other than pain. She felt confused. She woke up in a room that smelled like engine grease and recycled air. The ceiling above her was low and metal, covered in pipes and wires. A soft hum ran through the walls, the heartbeat of a ship in flight. Caliph sat up too fast and her whole body punished her for it. Pain shot through her leg, her ribs, her arms. She gasped and grabbed the edge of the cot she was lying on. It was narrow and firm, bolted to the wall, covered in a rough gray blanket that smelled like soap and sweat. She looked down at herself. Someone had removed her torn survival suit and replaced it with a loose shirt and soft trousers. Her leg wound was wrapped in clean white bandages. A small medical patch on her arm blinked with a faint green light, feeding something into her bloodstream, antibiotics, probably. Maybe painkillers. The room was small. A single door sealed shut, a locker in the corner, a shelf with a water flask and a folded towel, no windows, no restraints, no guards. Calith's heart was racing. Every instinct told her she was in danger. She had been taken aboard an alien ship by a species she knew almost nothing about. In Vathari space, a lone exile found by outsiders would be sold, interrogated, or used as a bargaining chip. That was how the galaxy worked. Everyone wanted something. She tested the door. It was unlocked. That confused her more than anything. She stepped out into a narrow corridor. The ship was not large, maybe 4 or 5 rooms connected by a central hallway that led to a cockpit at the front. The walls were covered in scratches, dents, and old repair patches. This was a ship that had been used hard for a long time. It had no beauty, but it felt solid, stubborn, like it refused to fall apart. She followed the hallway toward the sound of movement and found the human sitting in the cockpit, his boots up on the console, eating something from a metal container. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway. "You're awake," he said. His voice was calm, neither surprised nor concerned. He swung his boots down and set the food aside. "How's the leg?" Calith stared at him. He was the same male from the surface, scarred face, brown eyes, broad shoulders. He was wearing a plain dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, showing forearms covered in old marks and burns. A soldier's arms. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice was rough, her throat dry. "My ship, the Whetstone." He reached behind him and grabbed a water flask, then held it out to her. "Drink. You've been out for almost 2 days." 2 days. She had been unconscious on this stranger's ship for 2 full days, and he had simply let her sleep. She took the flask slowly, watching his hands, watching his eyes. She drank. The water was clean and cold and the best thing she had ever tasted. "My name is Dane Harker," he said. "Commander, Terran Union Frontier Rangers. I picked up an irregular signal from Salhin 4 and came to check it out." He paused. "Found you instead." "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. Harker tilted his head slightly. "Why what? Why did you stop? Why did you help me?" He looked at her for a moment, and then he said something that broke every model she had ever built of how the universe worked. "You were dying, that was enough reason." Calith didn't know what to do with that answer. It didn't fit any framework she understood. In the Dominion, every action had a purpose, a calculation, a cost-benefit analysis. Help was a transaction. Mercy was a weakness. Kindness without return was a concept so alien it might as well have been fiction. She stood in the doorway of his cockpit, holding his water flask, and she could not find a single word to say. A voice spoke from the ceiling, flat, dry, and slightly bored. "Her vitals are stable, Commander, but her stress hormones are extremely elevated. She appears to be terrified of you." Calith flinched and looked up. "That's Mace," Harker said. "Ship's AI. Ignore him, he has no manners." "I have excellent manners," Mace replied. "I simply choose not to use them." Harker almost smiled. He gestured to the co-pilot's seat. "Sit down if you want, or go back to the room. It's yours for as long as you need it. We're about 6 days out from the nearest station." She didn't sit. She stood there and asked the question that was burning in her chest. "What do you want from me?" Harker looked at her directly. His brown eyes were steady and patient. "Nothing." "That's not possible." "It is where I come from." She didn't believe him, she couldn't. But she also couldn't find the lie. Vathari were trained to read deception, microexpressions, vocal patterns, chemical signals. Harker's body was calm. His voice was even. His scent carried no markers of aggression or cunning. He was telling the truth, and that truth was more frightening than any threat. Over the next 2 days, Caliph stayed mostly in her room. She ate the food Harker left outside her door, simple human meals, warm and filling, with flavors she had never tasted before. She slept in his blanket and breathed his ship's recycled air, and she waited for the trap to close. It never did. On the 3rd day aboard, she ventured out again. She found Harker in the small common area between the cockpit and the engine room. He was sitting at a fold-out table, cleaning a weapon, a human firearm, heavy and black, with the focused attention of someone performing a ritual. He didn't look up when she sat across from him, but he acknowledged her with a small nod. They sat in silence for a while. The ship hummed around them. "I was a strategist," she said finally. She didn't know why she was telling him, maybe because silence was heavier than words, for the Vathari Dominion. Harker kept cleaning the weapon. "Military." "Yes." "What happened?" She hesitated. Then she told him. Not everything, not the full weight of it, but enough. The order to destroy Teshin colony, her objection, the enforcers, the erasure, the drop pod, the 7 days on Salhin 4. Harker listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down the weapon and looked at her. "You asked a question," he said, "and they threw you away for it." "I challenged the Arch-Synod. In the Dominion, that is the same as treason." "No," Harker said quietly, "it's not. It's called having a conscience." He paused. "They erased your name. Everything. My records, my service file, my family connections. To the Dominion, I was never born." Something changed in Harker's face. It was small, a tightening of the jaw, a hardness in the eyes, not directed at her, directed at something far away, something he had seen before and never forgiven. "I know what empires do to their own people," he said. "Humans aren't strangers to it either. We burned that sickness out of ourselves a long time ago, most of it anyway." He picked up the weapon again. "You're not nothing, Caliph. Whatever they told you, whatever they tried to make true, you're not nothing." She felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, opening, like a door that had been sealed so long she had forgotten it was there. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She walked to the cockpit and found it empty. Through the wide front window, she could see the stars, endless, scattered, burning in the black. She had seen stars her whole life from the decks of warships, but she had never just looked at them. May spoke softly from the ceiling. He lost his brother 3 years ago, the Orion Corridor War. His brother held a defensive line so civilian transports could escape. He didn't survive. Caliph said nothing. "The commander has been alone on this ship ever since," Mace continued. "He patrols, he salvages, and when he finds someone in trouble, he helps. That's all he does. That's all he has left." "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you keep waiting for the knife," Mace said. "And I'm telling you there is no knife. There's just a man who doesn't know how to walk past someone who's hurting." Caliph sat in the co-pilot's seat and looked at the stars. Her markings flickered, a faint blue light along her temples, barely visible, like a candle trying to stay lit in a storm. She didn't understand this human. She didn't understand his kindness or his grief or his stubborn, irrational need to help a stranger from a species that wouldn't have done the same for him. But for the first time since the enforcers took her, she felt something new and strange growing in the hollow space behind her ribs. It was small, it was fragile, and she didn't have a name for it yet. But it felt like it might be hope. The days aboard the Whetstone settled into a quiet rhythm. Harker woke early, checked the ship's systems, ate a simple breakfast, and went about his work. Caliph woke later, moved carefully on her healing leg, and tried to make herself useful. She cleaned. She organized the supply locker. She studied the ship's layout until she knew every panel, every wire, every weak point. She was a strategist. It was what she did. Even in exile, her mind could not stop mapping the world around her. On the fourth day of travel, she found Harker in the engine room, welding a cracked support strut. Music was playing from a small speaker mounted on the wall, human music, with a slow rhythm and a voice that carried more sadness than words. She stood in the doorway and listened. "What is this?" she asked. Harker lifted his welding visor. Song called Hallelujah. "Old Earth, very old." "What does it mean?" He thought about it. "It means a lot of things. Mostly, I think it means that beautiful things and broken things are usually the same thing." Caliph did not fully understand, but the music made her chest feel heavy in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. She filed it away, one more piece of the puzzle that was humanity. Over the following days, she began to ask more questions. Harker answered them patiently, sometimes with words, sometimes by showing her things. He showed her a small photo pinned above the cockpit console, two young human males, arms around each other, grinning. One was Harker, younger and unscarred. The other was his brother, Eli. "He was funnier than me," Harker said. "Better pilot too, don't tell Mace." "I can hear everything on this ship," Mace said from above. Caliph studied the photo. In the Dominion, the dead were not mourned individually. Their energy was said to return to the collective, and their names were recycled for future use. There were no photos, no memorials, no private grief. Death was administrative. "You keep his picture," she said. "Of course." "Why?" Harker looked at her like the question was the strangest thing he had ever heard. "Because he mattered, because I don't want to forget his face." He touched the edge of the photo gently. "Humans are like that. We hold on, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." Caliph thought of her own family, her mother, her younger sister, her uncle who had taught her to read star charts. All reassigned, all scattered, all forbidden from saying her name. The Dominion had taken them from her not by killing them, but by making her into a gap, a blank space where a person used to be. She wondered if any of them held on. On the fifth evening, she was sitting in the cockpit with Harker when Mace interrupted the silence. "Commander, I'm detecting an anomalous energy signature at bearing 274, distance approximately 900,000 kilometers and closing." Harker's feet came off the console. His entire body changed, relaxed posture gone, replaced by something tight and focused. Classification: Vathari Stealth Interceptor, Cathar class, running low emission profile, but the reactor leak gives it away. Caliph's blood went cold. She knew that ship class. She knew what it meant. "A cleanser," she whispered. Harker looked at her. "Talk to me." The Dominion sends them after erased individuals. If someone escapes the exile zone, a cleanser is dispatched to finish the job. They are black operations, no uniform, no flag, no record. They kill the target and erase the evidence. Her hands were shaking. "They found out you landed on Salhin 4. They know I'm alive." Harker was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Mace, battle stations. Reroute non-essential power to shields and engines. Load the forward cannons." "Already done, Commander." Caliph stood up. "Harker, you don't understand. You cannot fight a cleanser. Their ships are faster, better armed, and their pilots are trained from childhood. You should drop me on the nearest rock and leave. They only want me." Harker pulled his flight harness on and tightened the straps. He looked at her with those steady brown eyes and said, "Sit down and strap in." "You'll die." "Maybe, sit down anyway." She wanted to argue. She wanted to scream at him that this was irrational, that his survival was more valuable than hers, that there was no strategic logic in dying for a ghost. But something in his voice, not anger, not bravado, just absolute certainty, stopped her. She sat in the co-pilot's seat and pulled the harness over her shoulders. The cleanser hit them 20 minutes later. The first shot came out of the dark, a lance of white energy that struck the Whetstone's rear shields and sent the whole ship spinning. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered red. Harker gripped the controls and pulled the ship level with pure muscle, fighting the spin with his whole body. Contact confirmed, Mace reported. Vathari interceptor designation unknown. He's fast, Commander. I noticed, Harker said through gritted teeth. The attacker was a pilot named Vas Kethar, though they wouldn't learn his name until later. He flew like a surgeon cutting flesh, precise, elegant, and without mercy. His ship danced around the whetstone like a blade around a stone, striking at weak points, always staying just outside Harker's firing arc. Harker was outmatched in every technical way. His ship was slower, his weapons less accurate, and his shields were already weakening. But he did something that Caliph did not expect. He flew them straight into the asteroid field. "Are you insane?" she shouted as massive rocks filled the cockpit window, tumbling through space like the fists of sleeping giants. "Probably," Harker said. He was grinning. It was not a sane grin. Inside the asteroid field, everything changed. The open space advantage of the interceptor vanished. Here, it was chaos, spinning rocks, shifting shadows, narrow gaps between mountains of stone. The cleanser's elegant ship was designed for clean lines and open combat. The whetstone was built like a battering ram. Harker flew like a man who had made friends with death a long time ago. He threaded the ship through gaps that should have been impossible, using asteroids as cover, as shields, as weapons. He led the interceptor into a narrow canyon between two massive rocks and then killed his engines, letting the whetstone drift while the cleanser overshot. "Now," he said, and hit the forward cannons. The first volley caught the interceptor's left wing. Sparks and debris exploded into the void. The cleanser spun, recovered, and came back firing. A shot hit the whetstone's hull directly. Metal screamed. A conduit burst behind Harker's seat, spraying sparks across the cockpit. Harker didn't flinch. He rerouted power with one hand and steered with the other, blood running from a cut above his eye where a piece of shrapnel had caught him. "Caliph," he said calmly, as if asking her to pass the salt, "can you run tactical?" She stared at him. Then her training took over. Her fingers moved across the co-pilot's console, pulling up targeting data, shield frequencies, and weapon systems. Her mind, the mind of a Vathari strategist, built for exactly this kind of work, snapped into focus. "He's cycling his shields on a 4-second rotation," she said. "There's a gap when he transitions between frequencies, 0.6 seconds. If you fire during the transition, you'll hit bare hull." "Tell me when." She watched the data. She counted. The interceptor came around for another pass, its weapons glowing. "Now." Harker fired. The shot hit clean straight through the gap in the shield rotation, into the interceptor's main engine housing. The explosion was beautiful and silent. The cleanser's ship lurched, trailing fire and broken metal. But Vas Kethar was not finished. He came back one more time, damaged and burning, and launched a spread of missiles. Harker threw the whetstone into a rolling dive, and Caliph activated the point defense system, picking off missiles one by one as they closed. 2 got through. 1 hit the lower hull and blew a storage compartment into space. The other glanced off the cockpit armor and cracked the window, leaving a web of fractures across the glass. Then Mace said, "He's pulling back." The interceptor was retreating, engines flickering, hull blackened. As it turned away, a transmission crackled through the cockpit speakers. The voice was cold, smooth, and perfectly controlled. "You protect a ghost," Vas Kethar said. "There is no future in that." The channel went dead. The interceptor limped into the asteroid field and disappeared. Silence filled the cockpit. The alarms faded. The lights stopped flashing. The only sound was breathing, his and hers, ragged and fast. Harker was leaning back in his chair, bleeding from his forehead, his hands still on the controls. He looked like a man who had just wrestled something terrible and refused to let go. His ship was damaged, his body was damaged, and he was smiling. He turned to Caliph. She was sitting rigid in the co-pilot's seat, her hands still hovering over the tactical console, her bioluminescent markings glowing brighter than they had since the day she was exiled. She was breathing hard. Her eyes were wide. "Good shooting," he said. "Good flying," she replied. They looked at each other across the ruined cockpit of a battered human ship, surrounded by broken metal and the smell of burning wire, and something passed between them that neither of them had words for. It was not romance. It was not friendship exactly. It was the raw, unbreakable bond that forms when two people face death together and choose to keep fighting. Harker wiped the blood from his eye and said, "He'll come back." "Yes," Caleb said, "he will." "Then we'd better be ready." She looked at the cracked window, at the stars beyond, at the vast darkness that held both their enemies and their future. "We will be," she said. And she meant it. Farpoint Anchorage appeared through the cracked cockpit window like a city floating in the dark. It was built into the skeleton of a hollowed-out asteroid, with docking arms stretching out in every direction and hundreds of lights blinking along its surface. Ships of all sizes and shapes were coming and going, freighters, patrol boats, mining rigs and trading vessels. It was messy, loud, and alive. Caleb had never seen anything like it. The Whetstone limped into the station's docking bay, trailing smoke and leaking coolant. The landing was rough. Harker had to fight the controls the entire way down because the stabilizers had been half destroyed in the battle. When the ship finally settled onto the platform and the engines died, he sat back in his chair and let out a long breath. "We made it," he said. "Barely," Mace added helpfully. The docking bay was crowded with mechanics, traders, and station workers. As Caleb followed Harker down the ramp, she stopped at the bottom and stared. The bay was full of different species, not just humans. She saw Rithki, short and quick-moving with golden skin, hauling cargo on hovercarts. She saw Malur, broad and heavy with stone-gray hide, working on ship engines with tools that looked too delicate for their massive hands. She saw Exhale, thin and translucent, gliding between groups with their strange, quiet grace. And they were all working together, talking, arguing, laughing. In the Dominion, other species were tolerated at best and despised at worst. The Vathari believed in the purity of their kind. Mixed settlements were considered contamination. The idea that different species could live and work side by side as equals was not just strange to Caleb. It was something she had been taught to see as impossible. Yet here it was, imperfect, noisy, and very real. Harker led her through the station's main corridors. Farpoint Anchorage was a Terran Union frontier station, which meant it was technically under human authority, but the population was mixed. Signs on the walls were written in 4 different languages. Food stalls sold meals from a dozen worlds. A Rithki child ran past them chasing a small mechanical toy, and a Malur woman called after it in a deep, warm voice. Caleb walked through all of this in silence, her eyes wide, taking in every detail. Her strategist's mind was cataloging everything, the layout, the security points, the social dynamics, but her heart was doing something else entirely. It was aching, not with pain but with the slow, heavy realization of everything she had been denied. This was what the Dominion feared, not weakness, not chaos, connection. Harker took her to the station's Frontier Authority office, a plain room with metal walls and a desk covered in data pads. The officer behind the desk was a human woman named Captain Yara Osai, dark-skinned, sharp-eyed, with close-cropped hair and a no-nonsense voice. "Commander Harker," she said, looking up, "your ship looks like it lost a fight with an asteroid." "Close," Harker said, "Vathari cleanser. He jumped us in the Surin corridor." Osai's expression changed. She looked at Caleb. "And this is the reason." Harker nodded. "She's Vathari, erased by the Dominion for filing an objection to a civilian purge order. She's requesting asylum." Osai studied Caleb for a long moment. Then she pulled up a data pad and said, "Under Terran Union Frontier Code, Section 12, any individual who reaches a Union station and requests protection from political persecution is entitled to provisional asylum pending review." She tapped the pad. "It's not complicated. You asked. The law says yes. Caliph blinked. That's all. That's all. You don't need to verify my value, my usefulness, my genetic profile. Osa frowned. You're what? In the Dominion, protection is granted based on an individual's contribution score. If you have nothing to offer, you receive nothing. Osai set the pad down. She looked at Caliph with something that might have been sadness and might have been anger. This isn't the Dominion, she said. You're a person. That's enough. Caliph stood in that plain office, in that noisy station full of strangers, and she felt something inside her collapse. Not like a building falling, like a dam breaking. All the control, the composure, the carefully maintained numbness that had kept her alive through the exile and the escape, it all came apart at once. She cried. It was not graceful. It was not quiet. She bent forward and covered her face with her hands, and she wept with the full force of everything she had lost. Her family, her name, her world. The Dominion had taken all of it, and she had survived by pretending it didn't matter. It mattered. It mattered so much she could barely breathe. Harker stood beside her and said nothing. He didn't touch her. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed, solid and present, like a wall she could lean against if she chose to. And after a while she straightened up, wiped her face and nodded. I'm ready, she said. Osai processed her asylum request in 20 minutes. Caliph was given a temporary residence unit, a station identity card, and access to the common facilities. She was free. That evening, Harker found her on the station's observation deck, a wide platform with a transparent ceiling that looked out at the stars. She was sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up to her chest, her markings glowing faintly in the dim light. How's the room? He asked, sitting beside her. Small, clean. It has a lock on the door that I control. She paused. That's the first time I've had a lock that was mine. Harker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Caliph, I need you to know something. When the repairs on the whetstone are done, I'm heading back out. The patrol doesn't stop. He looked at her. There's a seat on that ship if you want it. No obligation, no debt, just an open offer. Before she could answer, Mace spoke through Harker's comm unit. Commander, I'm receiving a priority alert from Station Intelligence. They've intercepted Dominion communications. The cleanser Vas Kethar has rallied a strike cell, 3 interceptors and a light frigate. They are moving toward Farpoint. The observation deck suddenly felt very cold. Harker stood up. He's coming here. That's a violation of neutral territory. Correct, Mace said. It appears the Dominion considers this matter important enough to risk a diplomatic incident. Caliph felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. They were coming because of her. One ghost, one erased nobody, and the Dominion was willing to attack a sovereign station to finish the job. The next 12 hours were chaos. The station council convened an emergency session. Representatives from every faction on the station crowded into the council chamber: humans, Rithki traders, Malware engineers, exhale scientists. The debate was fierce. We cannot risk a conflict with the Vathari Dominion over one individual, said a Rithki trade representative, his golden hand spread wide. The cost is too high. If we hand her over, we set a precedent, Captain Osa replied, her voice hard. Any government can send a kill squad to our door and we'll just give them what they want. That's not asylum. That's surrender. The argument went back and forth. Some wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to quietly move Caliph to another station and pretend nothing had happened. Then Dane Harker stood up. He was not a politician. He was not a diplomat. He was a frontier ranger with scars on his arms and engine grease under his fingernails. He stood in front of the council and spoke in a voice that was not loud but carried to every corner of the room. I've been listening to this debate for an hour, he said, and I keep hearing the same question: is she worth it? Is one person worth the risk? He paused and looked around the room. I want to tell you something about where I come from. Humans built stations like this because we got tired of the alternative. We got tired of empires that threw people away. We got tired of watching the powerful decide who mattered and who didn't. He pointed toward the corridor outside. Out there, right now, a Rithki kid is playing in the hallway. A Malwar woman is fixing a water recycler. A exhale doctor is treating a human miner's broken arm. That's not an accident. That's a choice. Every day, this station chooses to be something better than what we came from. His voice was quiet and steady. The moment you hand someone over because it's easier, you become the thing you built this place to get away from. She asked for help. That means something. Or it doesn't, and none of this does. The room was silent. Captain Osei called the vote. It was not unanimous. It was not easy, but the majority held. Farpin Anchorage would not surrender Caliph Sorvan. They would fight. Caliph stood at the back of the council chamber, listening to the vote. She heard her name spoken by strangers, people who had never met her, who owed her nothing, who had every reason to let her go, and they chose to keep her. Harker walked toward her after the session ended. The station was already moving to battle stations around them. Sirens were beginning to sound. People were running to their posts. "You didn't have to do that," she said. Harker shrugged. "Yeah, I did." She looked at him, this strange, stubborn, irrational human who had pulled her from a grave, flown through fire for her, and now stood in front of a council and told them she mattered. He wasn't strong enough. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't smart enough, not by Vathari standards. But he was brave in a way that had nothing to do with strength. He was brave in the way that mattered. "Thank you," she said. The words were small, but she meant them with every cell in her body. Harker nodded. Then he turned and walked toward the docking bay, where his broken ship waited to fly again. The Dominion strike cell arrived at dawn, or what passed for dawn on a station that measured time by shifts and schedules rather than sunlight. 3 interceptors and a light frigate, moving in tight formation, their dark hulls cutting through space like the tips of thrown knives. Caliph watched them on the tactical display in Farpoint's command center. She knew those ship profiles. She had studied them, memorized their capabilities, and written strategic assessments on how to use them. Now she was going to help destroy them. Captain Osei stood beside her, arms folded, jaw tight. "How do we play this?" Caliph's hands moved across the display, pulling up data. The frigate is the spine. It carries the command uplink for the interceptors. If we cripple it, the interceptors lose coordination and have to operate independently. That cuts their effectiveness in half. Osei nodded, and the cleanser Kethar. He'll be in the lead interceptor. He won't hold back with the frigate. He'll come in fast and try to breach the station directly. He wants me. Everything else is a distraction. Then we make sure the distraction doesn't work. Outside in the docking bay, Harker was climbing into the whetstone. The ship had been patched together by Farpoint's mechanics in less than 12 hours, a miracle of welding, wire, and stubbornness. It wasn't pretty. Half the armor plates were mismatched, borrowed from scrapped ships. The cockpit window had been replaced with a thick slab of emergency shielding that distorted the stars into smears of light. But the engines worked, the weapons were loaded, and the shields were holding. Harker wasn't alone. Flying beside him were 6 other ships' volunteers. A human patrol corvette crewed by 3 off-duty rangers. 2 Rithki gunships, small and fast, their golden pilots grinning with the reckless joy their species was famous for. 2 Malwar mining barges, massive and slow, retrofitted with industrial rail cannons that could punch holes through solid rock. And a single exhale scout ship, silent and nearly invisible, running sensor jamming that would confuse Dominion targeting systems. It was not a fleet. It was a collection of misfits, workers, and volunteers who had decided that a line needed to be drawn, and they were going to draw it. "All ships, this is Harker," Dane said over the comm. "Keep it simple. Corvette and gunships, you're with me on the interceptors. Mining barges, target the frigate, hit it hard, hit it often. Exhale scout, keep the jammers running and stay alive. Nobody be a hero. Define hero, one of the Rithki pilots said cheerfully. Someone whose friends have to carry them home, Harker replied. Don't make me carry anyone. The comm crackled with laughter. Then the Dominion ships opened fire and the laughter stopped. The first interceptor came in fast, impossibly fast, and hit the corvette with a volley that blew through its forward shields. The corvette spun, recovered, and returned fire. The Rithki gunships broke formation and swarmed the second interceptor, their small ships darting around it like angry insects, peppering its hull with rapid-fire bolts. Harker went straight for the lead interceptor, Vas Cathar. The two ships met in the space between the asteroid and the stars, and the fight was everything Caliph had feared. Cathar was brilliant. His ship moved like liquid, flowing between attacks, always just out of reach. He fired with precision that would have made any Vathari commander proud. But Harker didn't fight like a commander. He fought like a human. He absorbed hits that would have forced any sane pilot to retreat. He flew at angles that shouldn't have worked, using the Whetstone's armored bulk as a weapon, shouldering into Cathar's attack runs and disrupting his flight patterns. Every time Cathar gained the advantage, Harker did something unexpected, killed his engines, flipped the ship, fired backwards, used the station's docking arms as obstacles. In the command center, Caliph coordinated the defense. Her voice was calm and precise, feeding information to every ship in the volunteer fleet. She tracked the Dominion ship's shield cycles, weapon reload times, and flight patterns, calling out windows of vulnerability with the sharp focus of the strategist she had been trained to be. Barge 2, fire now, the frigate's lower shields are cycling. Rithki lead, break left, the interceptor is setting up a crossfire. Harker, Cathar is pulling back to regroup. He's going to come in low on your port side. Copy, Harker said, and rolled the Whetstone into position. The mining barges hammered the Dominion frigate. Their rail cannons were not elegant weapons. They were designed to break asteroids, and they broke the frigate's shields with the same blunt force. The first volley cracked the shield grid. The second tore a hole in the hull. The third hit the engine housing, and the frigate began to drift, venting atmosphere and fire. With the frigate crippled, the interceptors faltered. Their coordinated assault broke apart into individual attacks, still dangerous, but disorganized. One of them took a full spread from the Rithki gunships and exploded in a bloom of white light. The second tried to retreat and was caught by the corvette's long-range guns, its engines shattered. Only Cathar remained. And Cathar was no longer fighting to win. He was fighting to finish his mission. His interceptor dove toward Farpoint anchorage, engines burning at full power. He wasn't targeting the defense fleet anymore. He was heading for the station itself, specifically for the docking bay closest to the command center. He's making a boarding run, Caliph said, her voice tight. He's going to breach. Harker pushed the Whetstone after him, but Cathar was too fast. The interceptor hit the docking bay like a missile, crashing through the external doors and skidding across the bay floor in a shower of sparks and torn metal. Emergency shields slammed into place, sealing the breach, but Cathar was already inside. He emerged from the wreckage of his ship in full combat armor, sleek, black, and decorated with the markings of the Cleanser Corps. He moved fast, cutting down two station guards with a weapon that hummed with cold energy. His path was straight. His target was clear. Caliph. She met him in the corridor outside the command center. She was not armed. She wore no armor. She stood in the hallway with her hands at her sides and her markings glowing bright blue, brighter than they had glowed in months, burning along her spine and temples like veins of living light. Cathar stopped 10 meters away. He retracted his helmet, revealing a face that was perfectly Vathari, angular, cold, with pale gray skin and dark, empty eyes. "You should have died on Salhin 4, he said. "I should have," she agreed, "but someone decided I was worth saving." A human, the word dripped with contempt. You've traded one master for another." "No," Caliph said. "I haven't, that's the difference. He never asked me to be anything. He never demanded obedience or loyalty or service. He helped me because I was dying, that's all. And if you can't understand that, if the Dominion can't understand that, then the Dominion is even more broken than I thought." Cathar raised his weapon. "Sentiment doesn't stop energy bolts." "No," said a voice from behind him, "but I do." Harker stepped out of the side corridor. He was bleeding from a cut on his arm, breathing hard, and his armor was dented and scorched. But his eyes were steady and his weapon was raised. Cathar moved first. He was faster. Vathari reflexes were superior to human reflexes by a significant margin. His weapon swung toward Harker with blinding speed. Harker didn't try to be faster. He did what humans had always done when outmatched. He closed the distance. He charged forward, taking the edge of Cathar's shot across his shoulder, and crashed into the cleanser with his full weight. The fight was ugly. There was no grace in it. Harker fought with his fists, his elbows, his forehead. He grappled and twisted and refused to let go. Cathar was faster and technically superior in every way. He landed strikes that would have dropped most species. But Harker kept getting up. Every time Cathar knocked him down, every time a blow connected, every time his body should have quit, he stood back up. It was the most terrifying thing Cathar had ever seen. Not because the human was strong, because the human simply would not stop. Caliph moved. She grabbed a fallen guard's stun baton from the floor and swung it into the back of Cathar's knee. He buckled. Harker tackled him to the ground. Caliph hit him again, once, twice, 3 times, until his body went limp and his weapon clattered across the floor. They knelt over the unconscious cleanser, both of them gasping for air. Harker was holding his shoulder where the energy bolt had burned through his armor. Caliph's hands were shaking. "Nice timing," she said. "I try," he wheezed. They bound Cathar with emergency restraints and dragged him to the brig. The remaining Dominion ships, the crippled frigate and the scattered wreckage of the interceptors, were being collected by salvage teams. It was over. 2 days later, Cathar was loaded into a patched escape pod. Before the pod was launched, Captain Os recorded a message and attached it to the pod's broadcast system. The message was short. "She's ours now, test that again." The pod was fired into Dominion space. The message was received. There was no response. 3 weeks passed. The Whetstone sat in the docking bay, fully repaired, restocked, and ready. Harker ran his pre-flight checks in the cockpit, going through each system with the careful attention of a man who loved his ship like a living thing. The co-pilot's seat was occupied. Caliph sat with her harness buckled, her hands resting on the tactical console, her posture straight and calm. She wore new clothes of practical human-style gear, fitted for her taller frame. On the chest of her jacket, someone had stitched a small patch, the Terran Union Ranger emblem, modified with a single blue line running through it. "You're sure about this?" Harker asked. "I am. It's a long patrol, months in deep space, uncomfortable, dangerous. The food is terrible." "The food is fine." "Mace, tell her the food is terrible." "The food is adequate," Mace said, "though the commander's cooking is a documented hazard." Harker sighed. Then he noticed something on the ship's registry updated on the co-pilot's console. Crew member 2. Name, Cale Harker. He stared at it, then he looked at her. Caliph met his gaze. Her markings were glowing, warm, steady, and bright, not flickering, not fading, alive. "Your people say that names carry the meaning you give them," she said. "I was Caliph Sorvon and she was erased. I am choosing a new name. I am choosing what it means." "And what does it mean?" She looked through the cockpit window at the stars beyond. The void was enormous, dark and cold and full of dangers. But it was also full of places she had never seen, people she had never met, and a future that belonged entirely to her. "It means I have a home," she said, and I'm not letting go of it." Harker was quiet for a long moment. Then the corner of his mouth lifted, just a small movement, barely a smile, but enough. "Welcome aboard, Kale." Mace powered up the engines. The docking clamps released. The whetstone lifted off the platform, turned its scarred nose toward the stars, and flew. Behind them, Farpoint anchorage grew smaller and smaller until it was just another light among millions. Ahead of them, the void stretched on forever, vast, silent, and waiting. Kale settled into her seat and watched the stars. She had been thrown away by the people who were supposed to protect her. She had been erased, exiled, and hunted. She had lost everything, her name, her family, her world. And then a human had landed on her grave and pulled her out. Not because she was useful, not because she was valuable, not because she had anything to offer. Because she was alive, and to him that was enough. The ship hummed, the stars burned, and somewhere in the great dark vastness of space, a ghost became a person again.